Okay, Ocean, let's start by hearing your take on the new partnership with Evident. Can you tell us a little bit about what your new role will entail and how this came about?
I've known Florian a long time, and I've seen how this model has evolved and his thinking has evolved, and I like to think I've been a small part of some of how that thinking has evolved. So I see my role as asking the questions that ordinary people or traditional investors would ask, um, but also being open about the frustrations that I've seen traditional investors experience, and things that people would be happy if they got solved. So asking awkward questions, asking dumb questions, asking for more explanation, but then helping the business to really identify the exciting things that it has that people would really welcome once they get comfortable with things.
And with that in mind, one aspect that we really appreciate about you is this distinct approach to thinking that you have, which sets you apart from many of the individuals in the traditional finance industry. So, this is a kind of a two-part question, but given that you mentioned these different types of questions that you ask, do you have any examples that you could share for maybe some more unconventional, provocative questions that you want to place in front of Evident to consider as we develop our strategy?
Yeah, I think these go back to very basic principles of why do we do things the way we do things. Again, in most cases, there's a good reason things have evolved for a certain reason, but they're not always the most sensible or efficient way to do things. I mean, question one: why do we have a stock market? Why is the stock market the way it is? A second question would be, why do we invest in companies? Is a company the right format for owning an asset in every circumstance? And what sort of companies you have? Conglomerates, you have multinational companies. Is the ability to invest in assets always the most efficiently achieved by a fund or a company or some sort of gathering system? Might there be other ways to do that? I think that's my starting point. That is something I've always wondered about myself, and then I finally found somebody to talk these crazy thoughts with.
If I can add to that, and I'm smiling, is this first of all, the feeling is mutual, Ocean. And for me, what's been really interesting is this connection of these fundamental questions to a lot of the topics that came and still come out of the entire blockchain and Web3 space, where it was built by people who for a large degree don't come from the financial services world or from capital markets perspective, and they just question away basically and build systems up from the ground with their own logic. And I think a lot of our conversations were in a similar context of really looking at the fundamentals and ignoring tradition, if you will, because a lot of things in my mind are tradition and are just done the way because everyone is doing them that way. But we have technology now to ask these questions and to come up with different answers. And it has been a really interesting part of the journey as well. But the point is also, you can only ask these questions, in my mind, legitimately and come up with different answers. And so in a way, break the rules if you know the rules, if you have that expertise to begin with, because some of these things are just baked into how financial markets work and how they are structured and what the laws are and regulation. So that combination, I think, is a really important one. Knowing what the rules are, but still being able to go back to questioning the principles and going back to the questions of first principle that allows you to build really different solutions. Oisin said earlier, he feels like sometimes these are dumb questions, but sometimes the dumb questions only look so the first time you ask them, but when you dig a little bit deeper, those are actually the best questions. And that is really instrumental. If you want to build something that is truly different, that's where you have to go. And in my mind, you cannot do it alone. You need to do it with the right partners and with people who know how to ask the right questions. And that requires some level of openness also, and some level of creativity and thinking outside of the norms of an industry. I would argue for most people, having been in the industry for that period of time, it gets relatively hard to ask these types of questions. And I would say that has been the most interesting and fun part of working together so far. That these are very open and challenging conversations. And the other thing is, we can have them in a way where it's all about, we're just trying to come up with a better solution. So if this completely negates a lot of the assumptions that we had so far, if that means we need to rebuild things to change our strategy, that's okay, because we're still at a point where we were trying to figure out what is that core direction that we want to take, and we need to be open to change it if as needed, while following this North Star of what we are all about as a company and as a platform, truly changing how we interact with and how we provide access to alternative assets.
Oisin, given your well-established career in traditional finance, what prompted the shift towards the fintech and digital asset space? And how does this partnership with Evident align with your professional development?
So I suppose by leaving traditional finance, you get a certain amount of freedom, which is liberating. And I probably like the fact that I think Florian describes it as a crypto winter, that some of the hype around this area has been pierced, because in my experience, I'm not a crypto guy. I'm probably still a crypto skeptic. I missed it. But blockchain has always seemed to be an interesting design and concept, and with utility. And so I've seen in the past, I started my career in the first internet boom, and obviously a lot of that first wave of internet stuff turned out to be nonsense, but a lot of it turned out to be way, way, way bigger than we ever thought. And I think blockchain, even maybe crypto, is going through that same process where the nonsense is getting eliminated, but the core use cases are still genuine and powerful, and it's exciting to be part of that when others are maybe not so interested anymore. I think those quiet times are really interesting to look for opportunities. A lot of what I discussed with Florian is the frustrations and annoyances of the traditional finance model. So anyone who's coming with bright ideas, as Evident are, to make things simpler, cleaner, more efficient, more automated, I think that's someone bringing dreams come true, and I know how powerful that could be to some of the people I used to work with who were stuck in the middle of these old-fashioned processes. So I think it's an exciting time, and it's exciting, I guess, to not just be doing, but to be thinking of helping how other people could be doing what I used to do better, cleaner, faster, cheaper.
And
I just want to add here, Emma, if I may, I want to add here
Please do.
It's actually as exciting from a company and a founder perspective, that things are a bit more quiet and there's a lot more skepticism because you have a bit more time of thinking things through, and I think we're giving ourselves more space to get it right and not be trying to rush things, because that's the natural inclination in a hype cycle, that you just try to move as fast as you can because everyone is doing something and you feel like you're moving slower and you feel like everyone else is building amazing things. But we're all, when you either look at history or some of us as Oisin, have been in these cycles, we all know then that's not how it will turn out to be. So for us, this period is great actually. We also realize and know that it takes time to get it right, to build these things, to get them to a certain scale, and that is easier actually in times like these, where attention may be shifting elsewhere and things are a bit less hectic. So for us, that has been a great time to build. And I look at this as being fortunate that we're actually building now in exactly this type of cycle. I think it's the best environment we could have hoped for.
So now I'd like to ask both of you, because you each have such a distinct approach to thinking and to strategy, and sometimes sometimes you guys are on the same page, and sometimes you differ entirely, which is what's great and what I think makes your partnership so strong. But I'd like to ask if you could share an instance where having a unique sort of outside of the norm perspective on things has led to innovative solutions or strategies that may have been difficult to convince your team of, or to proceed with on your own, but in the end turned out to be exactly what you needed to do.
This is within evident context.
It's within any point in your career, I would say, where you can look at choosing a more unconventional approach to solving a problem or creating a strategy, and finding out that perhaps despite some pushback against it, actually being able to take that risk and to be confident about doing that really paid off. Because both of you, I think, have really refreshing perspectives and approaches to the way that you do the work you do.
I can bring an example in the context of evident on that, and it kept us busy for a little while trying to figure this one out. And it's about something that on the surface is relatively boring, and is part of the processes that you just, at least initially, we thought that we have to comply with, and that's the entire space of fund administration. So if you take a step back, if you want to digitalize assets and you want them to exist within the established legal frameworks, regulatory frameworks, one way is to use SPVs or fund structures as a scaffolding around the asset, essentially. And so how you run these structures drives a lot of the inefficiencies today. And on the flip side, means this is where most of the opportunity is to optimize. And so, when you approach this, and we worked with partners on this, and we had a lot of conversations with clients and other advisors as well, it was always taken as just that's just how it works, that you would need a fund administrator to run all these things, to basically make sure that that structure is managed appropriately. And what we did, and I'm not using this as an example that for myself, but rather as a team, is really then go back and look in detail at everything that is required from a legal perspective. So really going back to fundamentals, that we mentioned earlier and say, what actually is required in this role as a fund admin? And it turns out nothing is required. It's just work that's typically outsourced to a third party because it's administrative. It's an overhead that you don't want to have in house. That's one reason. The second reason is one of having a third party and having a certain segregation and external control. But what we found out is, well, essentially, that's not required anymore if you solve with technology. You can achieve both of these things and get a much better solution if you just rethink the entire process. So we really try to cultivate this approach of first taking a step back and asking, why is it done that way today? What are the reasons for it? And how can we change that? Like, what would be the extreme version of changing that? And then you can always walk back from there. But in a lot of areas that we've looked at in this broader stack in capital markets or in a structuring of investments, it turns out that you can rethink and reconfigure most things, because in the end, these are, most of this is contract driven, contract based. And so this is just one example of how we try to approach things. But for that, you need people who go with you there and help guide that process. Because in the end, of course, you want to get it right. You want to do it in a way where it's a robust setup and it fits within the existing laws and existing regulations. And striking that balance in the end makes for a good product.
Let's move on to discussing, because I'd love to hear from both of you, your perspective on the evolution of the alternative asset space and private markets in general. What are the fundamental changes you're witnessing, and how might these trends intersect with Evident's mission?
I think alternatives, frankly, is a little bit faddy. And I think a little bit like we talked about crypto, it's probably got to go through a bit of a hollowing out to see what's real in there. I think the original idea of investing in alternatives made a lot of sense because it was sort of unique opportunities off market. But now it's become such a large part of the market that it's not so clear that all those opportunities have to be that great. And I think some of the reasons people are using alternatives are not healthy. For example, lack of mark to market, which I think, you probably are going to see could end in some quite nasty pain somewhere in the environment we're in, for example, in commercial real estate. So I think that people have just been grabbing for alternatives because other people did alternatives and it's called alternatives and it's got higher fees and all sorts of nice things that people in finance like. So I think the opportunities in alternatives come through what Evident is doing from being able to have more direct ownership of your asset, take away intermediaries, have more transparency. A lot of the things that are quite fundamental problems with alternatives. I talked earlier about when you're inside something, you see a lot of the frustrations and also a lot of the maybe bad habits. And I saw a lot of frustrations and bad habits from the lack of transparency in alternatives in terms of being able to measure things properly, in terms of data, in terms of the client experience, in terms of knowing what assets you're owning, why and how. A lot of that was outsourced to the manager, which is fine for a while until it isn't. And so I think, again, this is a good time for someone like Evident, because there needs to be an upgrading of the transparency of how alternatives work, how they make money, why, what risks and rewards and diversification you're taking. And I think Evident's approach, rather than the kind of traditional blind pool fund approach, is a great start on that journey. So, in a way, I'm almost hesitant to associate it with alternatives. I think this is an alternative, because it's a different way. Alternatives is a different way of owning what we usually public assets. I think some of what we're trying to do with Evident is an alternative way of owning real assets, or what we might call alternative assets. So I think it's a generation beyond, and I think the market is going to be looking for that, especially if we do see some of the lazy or bad habits under the surface and alternatives become exposed by a more difficult economic and interest rate environment.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. So maybe one other way of summarizing this is, I think we will have been successful if alternatives are not alternative anymore, and it's really much more broadly accessible, and it doesn't fall into this this category that it has been. And it has changed. It has changed for 60, 70, 80 years since it has been around, or since first this term has been used. So that's really what we're looking at, and guiding it into its next chapter. I think you have to be ambitious when you build a company, and that's certainly one of our ambitions. And we see a lot of activity. We're not the only ones doing this. You see some progress in the US, a lot of which is based on the Jobs Act, which I think was about 10 years ago by now already, that opened up some of these markets, especially in venture capital funding, to a broader base of investors. And automatically you saw increased transparency, better access, more efficiency in these markets. And I think we'll only continue from here if you see what's happening in the US, in Europe, and now also in Asia. And we want to be part of that. And the end result will be vastly improved access, much better efficiency in these markets, much better transparency, and simply a better way of transacting value in these markets. And a lot of it goes back to the technology that we can use now, because you couldn't do these things if you don't digitalize the asset, if you don't automate the processes. And while nothing ever gets sold via just pure technology value, and that is a new technology, no one really cares about that. In the end, it's a tremendous enabler. So we need it for this technology to arrive, to be able to do these things, and to work on changing and bringing this sector in finance into its next chapter.
So with this in mind, I'm curious if both of you had not chosen to follow a path in finance, what other pursuit or passion do you think you would have followed in a career path? And I ask this because I'm very curious if this separate interest might influence your current work in any way.
God. Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to go into advertising, and I think certainly in terms of the things I do and the things I am involved with, and includes Evident, I think the way that you market things and the way that industry markets things could be way more interesting and way more useful and way more engaging. So that's definitely something I'm always pushing for. And then I suppose, yeah, I mean, something I start to do now, including with Evident, is sort of coaching and advising, and maybe that's something I enjoy, and um, and and I think a lot of that is about getting clarity on people's problems, on the real underlying issue, and then using that newfound clarity to make a bolder, cleaner, and more authentic decision than the one they started off for, which is usually already burdened by a lot of what ifs and all the political and regulatory and all the other compromises. So at least at the start, getting that clarity of vision and clarity of purpose and sticking to it. That's a lot of what it's about, and I think that's something that's useful for a mission like this, where you're trying to do something new and unfamiliar, of which people are either they don't know about it and or they're suspicious of it. I think recognizing that, getting the clarity, but keeping the vision and the purpose and the message, and getting people excited about it. That's a lot of a big part of the battle.
What I'd add to that, Ocean, is for me, in my impression, it was also your interest and maybe also your understanding of how human psychology works and what compels people, what drives them to do the things that they're doing, which in a way connects both, I guess, the marketing side and also then being able to maybe ask the right questions and point people in the right direction, which is certainly a part of why I enjoy our interaction and working together. But to answer your question, Emma, it's from if I look back, and for me as a child, I wanted to be a forester. So, and I did learn the profession of being a forester. You have this wonderful school system in Austria where you can elect to spend an extra year in school before university and learn a profession. And in my case, that was to be a forester. And so the connection to, or the path really first was from this big economic machine of a forest to actual economics, and a lot of economics and this idea of sustainability, for example, goes back to the space of forestry, and that brought me to then finance. And today it's in a way coming back full circle with, how can we, what is the role of capital really, of how channeling more capital to things that make a positive contribution in the broadest sense. It doesn't have to be, this definition, there's more technical definitions around ESG, but contributing something positive. And to me, that's a lot of this is coming home to these original ideas that interested me, not just in the context of nature. And so I guess so that's how we follow through our life, consciously or anyway subconsciously, what really interests us fundamentally. And we express this in different ways in different roles. And maybe when you look back, you see the connections. I certainly do that now. If I look back on how I got here, that there's always these cross connections that maybe are not obvious at first, but for me they are now.